The Derbyshire Peak is a district of England steeped in folklore and custom, from the riots of Shrovetide football to the decorum of a well-dressing. The Peak is noted for the colour and diversity of its cultural heritage. And there is no finer expression of this heritage than in its Morris dancing.
This is it and that is it and this is Morris dancing. The piper fell and he broke his neck and he said it was a chance. You don't know and I don't know what fun we had at Brampton. A roasted pig and a curdled duck and a pudding in a lantern.
The epitome of Derbyshire Morris is the Winster processional. Sweeping from one side of the broad village main street to the other, it embodies so much of the character of the local Morris dancing traditions. In costume, in the configurations, in the music, in its incorporation into village festivities, and above all its love of spectacle, the dance has a quality uniquely its own. This film documents the living traditions of the Derbyshire villages of Winster and Castleton and the town of Tideswell. None of them are simply anachronistic survivals, relics of a bygone age, but rather each is, in its own way, the unequivocal expression of its community's carnival spirit in the world today. Although the earliest known references to Morris dancing in Derbyshire scarcely date the tradition by more than 100 years, this is more an indication of the interest in antiquarianism than it is in the tradition's ancestry. In fact, of those comments recorded at the turn of the last century, none suggest that any of the traditions had not existed at least before living memory, which would reasonably take the date back another 100 years. The Winster correspondent who reported for the Derbyshire Times on the wakes of 1873 described an established tradition, recently revived and, in all its essentials, identical to the modern manifestation. On Tuesday the amusements opened with a donkey race at 2 o'clock, which caused considerable merriment. This over, the Winster Morris dancers performed one of their picturesque and characteristic dances along the street. The Morris dance is one of the most time-honoured customs of the place. The party consisted of 16 young men of the village who were dressed in a profusion of ribbons, rosettes, flowers, etc., and with the most pure and excellent taste. And the various dances were executed with a precision that did them infinite credit. On Saturday the Morris dancers again enlivened the village. The stately bearing of the Queen and her military attendant, and the never-tiring drollery and wit and humour of the clown and the witch, won the admiration of all. Towards the end of the 19th century, the three traditions were essentially the preserves of fraternities. The Oddfellows at Tideswell, the bell-ringers in Castleton, and the lead-miners of Winster. Both Castleton and Winster had a king and queen figure, and the main features of the dance in all three villages were the criss-crossing of the processional figure as the dancers travelled between their several stations, which were usually sited in front of the local pubs. The great milestone in the documentation of the three traditions came as a result of the visits made by Cecil Sharp, the champion of the English folk song and folk dance revival. His visit to Winster in June of 1908 was prompted by Mrs. Sorby, wife of a local vicar. He travelled by train to Darley-Dale station, from where he went to the nearby Mill Close lead mine to meet some of the dancers as they were finishing their shift. He found much the same tradition as had been reported some 35 years previously, and in his notebook he wrote, "No bells and no sticks. 2 large white handkerchiefs tied round buttons or links of each shirt cuff. White flannel cricketing trousers and shirts. Breast and trunk covered with tinsel and coloured paper. Sash crossed on breast, benefit club fashion. Headgear garlanded with paper flowers. The whole very gay and tawdry." When Sharp next saw the dancers on Wake Saturday, 4th of July, he arranged for a professional photographer to record for posterity this 1908 team. He noted 4 stationary dances: the Morris, the Reel, the Blue-Eyed Stranger and the Gallop, and the processional dance, which he referred to as the March. The 16 dancers were distinguished according to which file they belonged, by their hats, the ladies' side, or left file, decorating their hats, whereas those of the men's file were left plain. Sharp also gave details of the four characters, and he contrasted the aloofness of the king and queen with the good-natured clowning of the witch and fool. All in all, he was much impressed by the spectacle, and described it as being singularly beautiful and picturesque. The king walks in front with drawn sword, occasionally waving in time with music. Queen walks by side of musician. Extremely pretty to see handkerchiefs waving in air at end of every 4 bars. During the years following Sharp's visit, the tradition thrived under the patronage of the local doctor's wife, Mrs. Emma Fletcher. Sword dancers from Slights and Flamborough, as well as stick dancers from Headington Quarry near Oxford, were added to the team's repertoire. When the travelling Morris, a group of revival Morris dancers belonging to the Cambridge Morris men, visited Winster on Thursday of Wakes Week 1934, one of their number, a keen home movie pioneer, recorded some shots of the Winster dances. These historic fragments of film provide fascinating, albeit inconclusive, evidence of the tradition between the wars. The visit was to forge a link with Cambridge that has continued ever since. In the years following this visit, the Pierrot clown fool became a court jester, and the convention of wearing bells was adopted. The women of the village were also involved, joining with the men for country dancing and performing on their own some of the Headington dances. Displays were given throughout the county and beyond at garden parties, carnivals and festivals. Both world wars inevitably caused a break in the tradition, and revival after the Second World War seemed far from certain. When Colin Wills of the BBC visited the village in 1946, he was recording for posterity a defunct tradition. Joe Raines on the melodeon and Messrs. Wild, Bohm, Taylor, Gregory and Wagstaff gave a spirited though somewhat rusty rendition of the song and tunes. Although a team was hastily got up for the visit of Cambridge Morris men in 1950, it was the Festival of Britain in 1951 that provided the main impetus for revival, prompted by the interest and encouragement of George Noton, the local schoolmaster, and Russell Wortley, one of the Cambridge Morris men. Winster Morris dancers' fame spread rapidly. They danced far and wide, including a performance at the Albert Hall, Nottingham, as well as a visit to Cambridge, where they led a vast procession of dancers through the streets, performing the Winster dance. A short piece of film taken at Burton-on-Trent records this 50s team. Amazingly, within 4 years, the team had danced itself to a standstill, and the tradition lay dormant for 2 further decades. In Castleton, the Morris dancing has long been incorporated in the ancient ceremony of the Garland. By the time Sidney Addy, the folklorist, visited the village in 1901, the bell ringers had relinquished their role as Morris dancers to the young women of the village. Addy obtained his information from Edwin Barber, an ex-dancer. Apparently the men had stopped dancing in 1897. They had performed 2 distinct dances, a processional with alternate forward movement and criss-crossing, and a stationary dance for outside the pubs. Addy gives a brief description of the dancers and a transcription of the music, and notes that in place of handkerchiefs, the bell ringers had carried branches of oak. Sadly, the account is rather sketchy, and not even a photograph of the men's team survives. When Sharp visited the village in 1912, he too interviewed Barber, but his notes add little to Addy's account. In Castleton, the dancing accompanies a ceremony that ostensibly commemorates the restoration of Charles II in 1660. For Garland Day is May 29th, or Oak Apple Day. Certainly many villages transferred their May celebrations to Oak Apple Day, not merely to celebrate the escape of Charles from the Roundheads by hiding in the oak at Boscobel, but rather to mark the fact that the restoration meant the end of the repression of such folk customs by the Puritans. Certainly Castleton takes the Stuart connection to heart, such that the King and his lady, who head the procession, wear Stuart costume and have done so since the bell ringers dropped out. Moreover, the wearing of a buttonhole of oak leaves is obligatory among the villagers. The element of pageant has dominated the development of the tradition this century, such that since 1955 a local beauty has been preferred in the role of the lady, which, like Winster's Queen, had previously been taken by a man. The girls who perform the present dances process with a simple polka step in 2 files without any crossing over, and their stationary dance is executed in a large circle, the main feature being a chain. Their white dresses are decked with posies of flowers in oak leaves and ribbons, and they each carry a beribboned stick in place of the bell ringers' boughs of oak. During the ceremony, which takes place in the evening, the girls also perform maypole dances, and the event closes as the top knot of the garland, known confusingly as the Queen, is placed on the war memorial. Abide with me is played, and the last post sounded. A tradition in which a man sits on a horse, completely enveloped by a 60-pound conical construction of flowers, as the procession he heads steadily wends its way around the 6 village pubs, pausing at each for the girls to dance to the local silver band and for refreshment, leaves the spectator struggling for a rational explanation, especially when the garland is proudly hauled up the church tower and placed on one of its pinnacles for all to see. But it doesn't seem to bother the villagers, who delight to show off their unique and bizarre custom to the world in a totally practical and matter-of-fact way. In Tideswell, Morris dancing marks the climax to Wakes Week, a week of sports and church services, fancy dress and concerts, street, shop and house decorations, and the dressing of the wells. And it is the centrepiece of a torchlight procession which is headed by the Wakes Queen, who, in contrast to the Winster Queen or Castleton Lady, is in the tradition of pure carnival. The troupe of girls who lead the dance have only emerged during the last few years and have been trained especially for the Wakes, to lead the Morris dance and to give marching displays. The current version of the dance is similar to Sharp's notation in all but stepping, with the dancers alternately moving forward in column and crossing over and back like the Winster processional. Although a Mrs. Hodgkinson had sent Cecil Sharp a transcription of the music to the Tideswell Morris dance as early as 1900, it was not until 10 years later that he managed to arrange a visit. He notes that the dancing was performed by members of the local Sick Benefit Club and the Oddfellows, who, with jackets off, wearing the sashes of their order and carrying white handkerchiefs, danced around the town on the evening of Wakes Monday. About 48 dancers took part, and, led by the Tideswell Public Prize Silver Band, they visited all the local pubs, taking refreshment at each, as well as paying their respects to an important patron, Dr. Parkes. On the Thursday, the processional dance was repeated, the whole village joining in, men and women, and especially the school children, and on the Saturday it was the turn of the junior members of the Oddfellows. After the First World War, the dancing was as popular as ever, and every evening of the Wakes Week culminated with the Morris dance. However, during the subsequent years, the leading role taken by the Oddfellows diminished, until the dance became a general free-for-all. When Wakes Weeks was revived in 1947, after a lapse during the Second World War, the dancing continued. The visits made by Morris clubs from Burton-on-Trent, Manchester, Cambridge and Stafford, and especially the Tideswell meeting of the Morris Ring, held in 1952, helped to keep alive the interest of the townspeople in their own dance. The Saturday night torchlight procession to escort the Morris dancers was first introduced before the Second World War, and it was appropriate that in 1960 the Stafford Morris men, who had shown such an interest in the Tideswell dance, should be asked to hold the torches, a duty they have gladly performed ever since. So popular has the procession become, with visitors from all over the peak and beyond, that a second torchlight procession has since been inaugurated by way of a rehearsal on the Saturday before Wakes, especially for the townspeople. It is this preview that features in our film. Winster is a beautiful village, sited high above the Derwent Valley on a fault between the limestone and the gritstone. In the 18th century it was a bustling market town whose prosperity was due to the exploitation of the local mineral wealth through the mining of lead. The legacy of this former age is an architectural heritage that includes over 60 scheduled buildings. Alleys and pathways, jennels and jitties, criss-cross the hillside, making it a postman's nightmare, while evidence of the old lead miners is to be seen all around, in the hillocks, spoil heaps and shafts that punctuate the landscape. Even in Sharp's day the lead mining industry had contracted, such that most of the miners worked at Mill Close, some 3 miles east of the village, and this, the largest lead mine in England, closed in 1939. Today, most of the villagers are employed outside the village, but this has not dampened the local spirit, especially at Wakes. In fact, the enthusiasm for the carnival has steadily grown. The fancy dress competitions, the decoration of the floats, the crowning of the carnival princess, the tug-of-war, the brass band concerts, the bunting, the dedication service to St. John the Baptist, as well as numerous bun feasts, have become the staple ingredients. It was a combination of several factors that brought about revival in 1977. Above all, it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee celebrations and the desire to see their own Morris danced again that prompted the village to form a scratch team. But their existence was short-lived. Later in the year, when as a result of the interest shown by Morris dancers from outside the village, a reunion of the old dancers was organised, the younger men present determined to reinstitute practices, and the older members agreed to provide tuition and guidance. When the men danced for the first time in the 1978 Wakes, 3 of the dancers plus 1 of the characters had been members of the 50s team. Under the leadership of Roy Witham, one of the 50s dancers, the 5 Winster dances had been reconstructed. Senior dancers, notably Arnold Greatorex, was sadly too old to dance again and had attended practice nights and had given freely of their important advice and experience. Similarly, Stan Marshall, who in the 50s had stood in as musician for Joe Raines, had passed on the tunes. The new team had also learnt the song, a rigmarole that simply served to evoke the tune and could be used at practices should a musician fail to arrive. Costume had to be assembled from scratch, and this was made possible by a generous loan from the Morris Ring and the untiring industry of the local womenfolk. The programme for Wakes Saturday afternoon is straightforward. Everything starts with the fancy dress competition on the green, which involves the whole village, old and young alike. The carnival procession then sets off through the village, led by the Ashbourne Town Band and the Carnival Princess. The Morris dancers bring up the rear. After the carnival procession is over, at about 3:30, the dancers assemble at the far end of the village and perform the processional dance down the main street, pausing halfway opposite Woolley's yard to perform 3 stationary dances. They then process again to the market house, where further dances are performed, reaching a climax with the gallop, in which the whole village is invited to join. There's a break for tea at the Burton Institute. The dancing resumes at 6 at the Market House. The second station is outside the Bowling Green Inn on East Bank, and the evening reaches its climax with a performance at the Miners' Standard, right at the top end of the village.
Piper fell and broke his neck and said it was a chance. You don't know and I don't know what fun we had at Brampton. A roasted pig and a curdled duck and a pudding in a lantern. The four characters at Winster are not just supernumeraries,
but have important parts to play. They are there to entertain, a temporary focus, to ensure that there is a space to dance, and to complement each other. The King and Queen provide a distinguished and ready-made audience for the dancers, and, make no mistake, the waving of the King's sword in the procession guarantees a clear passage for the dancers. The contrast between the witch and the jester, as they move freely between the dancers and the audience, fooling about and collecting donations, establishes the all-important contact that is essential if the dance is to function as a part of the village festivities. The real test of their success, and a measure of the involvement of the village in the Morris, is shown by the great number that join in for the final gallop.
Up
The discovery of the 1934 archival film of Winster provided a considerable surprise, for neither the real nor the Morris bore close resemblance to the dances reconstructed in 1977 by members of the 50s team. Fortunately, the problem was resolved philosophically. In future there would be two versions of each dance, the old Morris and our Morris, the old reel and our reel, and all four were performed at the 1979 wakes. If the truth be known, each dance has undergone considerable changes, such that the versions noted by Sharp before the First World War were not the same as were danced between the wars. Similarly, the 50s team had their own distinct versions, and it turns out these are not the same as those taught to the current team. But these changes have not come about as deliberate, conscious decisions, but unconscious, haphazard and happy accidents. It would seem that every time there has been a break in the tradition, the dances have re-emerged in a changed, but equally valid and vigorous form. Thereby the repertoire has been increased and enriched. The struggle to get a team of 16 dancers is an ever-present problem, and although the dances can be adapted for 8 or 12 men, the spectacle is much diminished. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the weaving or hay figures, of which Winster has 3 distinct versions. The intricate hay of 4 in our reel is reflected by the top and bottom 4 couples, and the throw-up of the handkerchiefs at the halfway stage reveals a fascinating contrast with the initial pattern of movement. During the evening, other dances in Winster's repertoire are shown, especially the Flamborough sword dance, which has been a great favourite in the village since it was performed some 70 years ago. It is also during the evening that special guest teams of Morris men are entertained and invited to show their dances. In 1979, Offaly Morris men and 1980, Cambridge Morris men were welcomed as an appreciation of the support they have given the village, particularly by performing regularly in Winster and thereby keeping an interest in the Morris alive.
stuck in a pudding in a lantern.
Oops, sorry.
Winster, Tideswell and Castleton on the surface seem three very different traditions, and this they are, for each has not only preserved its individuality, but has responded to changes in its own way. But running through each tradition there is a style, a genre of Morris dancing that is uniquely Derbyshire. The differences are obvious to all, but the underlying similarities are the key to an appreciation of this phenomenon. Take the love of spectacle and procession. Take the dance configurations and the tunes. Take the involvement of and integration into the community's life and festivities, and add to it the way in which each tradition has responded and adapted to an ever-changing situation. And you have the essence. Not just prettied-up versions of country dances, nor yet hybrid, watered-down Morris. True, the dances lack the intricate footwork found in the Cotswolds and the noisy flamboyance of the northwest clogged Morris dancers, but that's because Derbyshire Morris is something different, standing in its own right, a worthy testimony to the creative exuberance and loyalty to the heritage of the inhabitants of two remarkable villages and one remarkable town.